The Caro-Kann with c6, d4, d5 is known as one of black's most solid lines against 1e4 and is notoriously difficult to break down. At club level, it might be played by the old chap with the pipe who just sits there and waits for you to impale yourself on his rock-like defensive wall. I've played against guys like this myself. You can find them at every level of competitive chess. The way to beat them is with the move 3f3, which is one of the best kept secrets in the modern game, known only to attack-minded GMs such as David Bronstein, Joe Gallagher and Nigel Hodgson. It used to be known as the fantasy variation, but I prefer to call it the Caro-Krusher. The move 3f3 would certainly have warmed the heart of that great classical chess thinker Wilhelm Steinitz, because white simply supports this pawn on e4, which together with the pawn on d4 makes up a broad pawn centre. Now this f3 move might seem quite extravagant, but after black has played this passive move c6, it's well and truly possible. Black has three main plans in this position. The first one is to try to smash open the position with either e5 or d takes e4, and after f takes e4 then play e5. And this is the first plan that I'm going to look at. In the second section I'll be looking at the move e6, which frees up this bishop on f8 and incidentally threatens d takes e4, and after f takes e4 the horrible move queen h4 check. Finally, we'll take a look at another solid continuation for black, the move g6, which combines keeping the position closed with putting this bishop on g7 from where it pressurizes the d4 square. Against each of these modes of development, I'm going to show you what I think is the most effective setup for white. The only other move to see the light of day for black has been the move knight f6. But this is really a second-rate reply because white can play e5, and after knight g8 I think that white can play a very powerful move in this position with c4. And if black takes this, d takes c4, white plays bishop takes c4, and will then follow up with a pattern of development with knight c3, knight ge2, and probably bring this bishop out to e3, obtaining a real grip in the middle of the board. Of all black's defences to 1e4, nothing is tougher than the Caro-Kann defence. A perennial favourite of world champions such as Capablanca, Botvinnik, Petrosian and Karpov, it has now attracted the attention of a host of young GMs such as Michael Adams, Peter Lecko, Rustam Dautov and Igor Henkin. Their dynamic interpretation of many key lines has added a dash of poison to the Caro's known virtues. First of all, we'll go straight into the main line with d4, d5, knight c3, and now d takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop out to f5, attacking this knight on e4. In the old days, black players looked at the position after knight g3, bishop g6, h4, h6, knight out to f3, and thought that black had to prevent knight e5 by going knight d7. Recently, however, black has discovered that he can ignore this knight e5 idea and nonchalantly play his knight out to f6. As we will soon see, delaying the move knight d7 adds a great deal of dynamism to black's position. Next in the pecking order will be the Panov-Botvinnik attack, which challenges black's pawn on d5 with e takes d5, c takes d5, and now c4. If instead of playing c4, white brings his bishop out to d3, we have the exchange variation, which is very popular at club level. Another instinctive choice for club players is to push this pawn onto e5, a line which was popularised by Nigel Short. Against this, I firmly believe that black should counter-attack white's centre with the move c5. In one of my previous videos, I recommended the move 3f3 for white, maintaining his pawn centre on d4 and e4. But now I'm going to show you what I think is the best line for black. Finally, we come to white's second move alternatives, of which the most popular is the two knights variation, with knight f3, d5, and now knight c3. I'll also show you what to do if instead of playing knight f3, white brings his queen out to f3. The other lines we'll look at will be 2 d3 and 2 knight e2. Before we take a detailed look at the variations arising in the main line after d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, let's first of all take a closer look at the pawn structure. One of black's early achievements is the elimination of white's central e-pawn. He now intends to play something like e6 and eventually go c5, eliminating white's other centre pawn. At the same time, black has got this beautiful row of kingside pawns on h7, g7, f7 and e6, all of which helps lend his king greater protection. Let's now see how this works out in practice.
Welcome to this DVD on the Unorthodox Caro-Kann. I'm going to be going through a few of the main lines of the Caro-Kann and introducing you to some really quite unusual lines which I think have considerable practical impact. They perhaps are even lines you haven't seen before, and it just goes to show that even in an opening as well researched and commonly played as the Caro-Kann, you can find nooks and crannies which are actually not at all bad. We're going to start at the deep end with the main line where white plays his knight to c3 or knight d2 on the third move. Let's get to the position, and now white could play knight d2, he could play knight c3, it doesn't matter to us, we're going to take on e4. And now it's commonly thought that black has one of three moves in this position. He could play the Capablanca variation, which is bishop f5, he can play the Smyslov variation, knight d7, or he can play the Nimzowitsch variation, knight f6. And all of these moves have their own characteristics and idiosyncrasies, and you would expect that a white player who plays knight c3 or knight d2 is going to be ready for each and every of these moves. But on this DVD, I'm going to recommend a very unusual move here, h6, which isn't played very often, but it's sure to confuse your opponents. And actually, I think it's quite a good move. Now, the point of this move is to wait with the bishop on c8. What white's being forced to do here is to actually find the move. Black's move is a constructive waiting move. He's hoping to get an improved version of the Capablanca variation. Now, in order to understand this, let's go back one move and give black bishop f5. Well, the main line for a long time here has proceeded knight to g3, bishop to g6, now white goes h4, now black plays h6, h5, bishop h7, and battle is joined along these lines. Knight f3 is played, knight d7, bishop comes out to d3, and now black usually trades on d3. Well, if we go back to our main line move, which is h6, what black's hoping to do is to gain a tempo on this procedure. Also, white might not be able to play h4 at a convenient moment. So, white is being posed unusual problems at an early stage. And my first game comes from a British team championship played in 2010 between Geoffrey Taylor and Philip Makepeace.
Welcome. I'm International Master and FIDE Senior Trainer Andrew Martin. On this DVD we're going to examine a dynamic variation of the Caro-Kann which in my opinion is ideal for club players. I'm more or less a full-time chess trainer these days and I'm always on the lookout for these tricky, interesting variations that are more or less perfect for club chess and in fact congress chess, regional chess, anything I would say below grandmaster level. So join with me now and let's examine the Bronstein-Larsen variation of the Caro-Kann. I think you're going to find it an exciting ride. This video, in a little under 2 hours, is going to equip you with a very dangerous line of the Caro-Kann for black, which has more or less gone out of fashion. You certainly don't see it very often in high level games. In my opinion, it's a line which is perfect for the club player to adopt, as we're going to see Masters 2. And I'm talking about the position in the main line of the Caro after e4, c6, d4, d5. White protects his pawn. White can also go knight d2. Black takes on e4. This is very well known. And now knight to f6, allowing white to capture and double the black pawns. And I'm going to recommend g takes f6. This is the Bronstein-Larsen system, named after those two famous grandmasters who used g takes f6 with a great deal of success in their games. So to begin with, let's review the main black ideas. It's clear that g takes f6 voluntarily downgrades black's pawn structure, but in return black gets easy development for his pieces, as we're going to see. After g takes f6 there's a possible kingside attack in the offing. For instance, black could easily use the g file for attack. He could place a rook on the g file, and quite often the h pawn is used as a battering ram against the white kingside, so black pushes that pawn up the board again to create an attack. Let me just take these arrows out. There we go. There's also a possible opening up of the centre on the horizon. For instance, quite often in this variation black strikes with e5. He may strike with c5. Both these moves have to be well timed, but black can keep those ideas in mind. And finally, g takes f6 promotes dynamic and unorthodox play. So with all this in mind, let's take a little look at each of these ideas in turn. And we start with the game Serrana versus Onischuk, which was played in Taganrog in 2014. And in this particular game, white played knight to f3, which is one of the best moves, but in fact it's very modest. Black has plenty of replies, but I think moving the bishop on c8 is best, either to g4 or f5, and in this game black played his bishop out to g4. White played bishop e2, blocking the pin, and now black played queen c7, which is the usual square for the black queen in this variation, and on c7 the queen has the merit of preventing white from playing bishop f4. White castled, black played e6, and now white played knight to h4. Okay, well if white just marks time here, black's general plan is to move the knight to d7, to move the bishop to d6, and then to castle on the queen side. After that, black can place his rook on g8 and go h5 with a very dangerous kingside attack. So white moves to intercept this in the game by playing knight h4, more or less forcing the exchange of light squared bishops. But this doesn't stop black's plan. Black gets on with the idea of castling on the queen side. Here we see the game position. And now white goes rook to d1. Well, maybe if white could have foreseen what will happen, he might have chosen g3 here. A safety move, blocking the g file and preparing bishop f4. Now comes rook g8. I think that's a very good move. And if queen h5 here, black can go knight b6, b3, protecting the pawn, and now bishop b4. This is unclear. Black has very active play. well, it's simply all to play for. But now I think, going back to the game, white is on his own. He's finding moves on his own. He plays rook d1, strengthening the centre, and after bishop d6, black plays g3. Alright, so with the g-file blocked, black's got to find counterplay from somewhere. He moves his knight back to f8. And now a very characteristic move by white in this variation, d5. White can see that black is planning action on the king side, so he tries to create countermeasures in the centre. But of course this doesn't stop black's main plan here, which is to put the knight on g6. White exchanges.
Hello, this is Roman Djindjihashvili together with Eugene Perlstein. We are back with Opening Revelations series with the help of most powerful engine in the world, Ripka 3. And today's subject is Caro-Kann defense. Caro-Kann defense lately experienced a lot of new ideas for black. We checked on Ripka, we polished these ideas, and as you can see, Caro-Kann is today one of the very valuable weapons for black against e4. We have some ideas in well-known variations, and in some variations we haven't touched and we haven't changed anything if those positions are known as playable and good for black. So we have very interesting material, and hope after watching this DVD you will be taking Caro-Kann as one of your main weapons against e4. And here is Eugene Perlstein.
Hello, Eugene is here, and I would like to show you what to do after e4, c6. As Roman mentioned, Caro-Kann is really popular at top-level grandmasters. d4. Later on, we're also going to take a look at knight f3, d5, knight c3, where white typically keeps the pawn on d2. But for now, let's focus on the main line, d4, and here black plays d5.
And actually, it's difficult to say what the main line is, even after these two moves. White has several continuations. E takes d, as well as e5, knight c3, and even knight d2. But knight d2 and knight c3 will make absolutely no difference in our lecture here, because we're planning on taking on e4. So those are the main moves, and here is Eugene with one of the main continuations, knight c3.
Yes, after knight c3, we simply take on e4, knight takes e4, and we play bishop to f5.
Now this variation was played for decades, more than 50 years, and it was very popular. White was getting, Botvinnik was playing this variation very frequently and was getting good positions. But then they found some advantage for white, so this variation was for many years back and forth on the list of the most playable positions against e4.
And now the main line is knight g3,
Hello, my name is Roman Djindjihashvili, and this video is about Caro-Kann and the games on Caro-Kann. But before we start, it's very important that you understand that you have always wide variety of choices in the opening. And once you chose the opening, in the opening you have variety of variations to play. Now, Caro-Kann I used to play years ago, but very occasionally. It's not my choice of openings. It's not because something is wrong with Caro-Kann. It's absolutely not. There is nothing wrong with Caro-Kann, as well as there is nothing wrong with French, but I have never played it in my life. But the reason it's not my choice, Caro-Kann and French, because it's rather passive opening, and I never stood for passive openings. But however, I developed number of systems playing against these openings. And topic of today's discussion will be a couple of different things. So if I had to play Caro-Kann for black, what variation would I choose? And if I had to play with white against Caro-Kann, what my choice would be. Now, let me explain something. So, when I played Caro-Kann myself, I found some various different types of idea. And for example, I played in one of my most important games of my life. I chose Caro-Kann against Ljubojevic in the last round of New York International, where it was huge prize for first place, and I needed a draw to secure at least the tie for the first place. I chose Caro-Kann. I ended up winning the game and winning the tournament, but nevertheless, I never repeated this opening ever since. So there was some specific requirements for that game, and specific criteria were set. That's why I played it. Now, for white and for black, whatever I'm going to suggest on DVD is going to be divided on two parts. First, I'm going to describe my pet variation played against Caro-Kann, and I have a bunch of games to show you that played very well against Caro-Kann. And then in the end of the DVD, I would show you my choice, by far not necessarily the best, but my choice of Caro-Kann if I had to play it for black, my choice of variation. So the variation for white I would choose, if I had to play against Caro-Kann, would be ED, CD, and Bishop D3. Interestingly enough, this was variation that Fischer used to play against Caro-Kann. One of the variations. He played different variations as well. And actually, this is going to be our first game I want to show. It's Fischer's game against Petrosian. Now, both systems that I am going to suggest to you for white and for black, they are a lot easier to learn than any other system. Again, for white or for black. Hello, my name is Roman Djindjihashvili, and this is the DVD about Panov attack. Position after e4, c6, d4, d5, ed, cd, c4. This is the position with isolated pawn for white. In my opinion, positions with isolated pawn when one side has are maybe the most important positions to learn how to play, because they are so rich with possibilities of a positional play, of building an attack, of building defense, maneuvering, and everything, that by learning how to play these positions, you learn a lot, big chunk of the science how to play chess. After knight f6, knight c3, we got position from Caro-Kann. But is the Caro-Kann the only opening we can get it out of? Absolutely not. Well, if black plays g6 here, which is one of the very popular continuations, we can get this position from Grunfeld even. So now let's go back, and I'm going to show you that we can get this position from center counter. Knight f6, c4, and after c6, d4. So we got the same position. How do we get it from Grunfeld? Well, for example, d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3. This can be done with d5, e3, c5, for example, knight f3, cd, ed, and we got the position with g6. So also, not exactly the same position, but very similar positions you can get from Tarrasch defense of Queen's Gambit. But here we had Tarrasch defense. Now the other side has isolated position, pawn. Black is going to have. You can get it from Queen's Gambit, except from Ninzo Indian, from almost from every opening. You can get the positions with isolated pawn. And art of playing this position has a lot to do with your progress as a chess player. Right now we looking at directly from Caro-Kann or Scandinavian getting this exact position, where black has mainly three very credible choices. I do not mention DC because it's a kind of a silly move that only inexperienced player can play and let white develop bishop with a tempo. Now, so the three credible continuations are e6, probably the most popular. Second is g6, also popular, and knight c6, popular as well. So we are not gonna evaluate which one is most popular and how often do we play and probability of getting one of these moves. No, we have to look at them all. And let's start with the most obvious and most expected answer, which is e6. On e6, knight.
We're fortunate to have with us one of the world's foremost practitioners on this opening, world chess champion Anatoly Karpov.
Hello.
So Anatoly, lately you've begun to favor the Caro-Kann rather a bit more in your important games.
Yes, for a time I played more Spanish and e5. But then I discovered that Caro-Kann is not so positional and solid. Caro-Kann became more dynamic and combinational. And so I found many interesting possibilities, like today we are going to discuss game with Kamsky, in which I played one of the biggest novelty in last years, and then we shall discuss game with Hort. I played with white, and then the last game with Kasparov, which we played in the Navis tournament.
Now, all three of these games have rather different character. The game with Kamsky, you mentioned this is one of the greatest opening novelties in the last few years. The moment which you actually played this was not over-the-board discovery. This was pre-game analysis?
Yes. Yes. I had some problems thinking when I played one of the games with Kasparov 3 or 4 years ago. And so I was afraid of continuation. And then I discovered at home that this is a nice possibility.
After e4, black plays c6. Okay, white plays d5, d4, occupying the center in very classical style. Okay, now black plays d5. Now, it's my understanding the reason you prefer the Caro-Kann to the French defense is that you're able to occupy the center and contest white's control without blocking in your queen's bishop.
Yes, I believe that white has different possibilities now, of course, just to close the center with e5 or defend the pawn on e4. And then black has different possibilities also, but the main...
Okay, the main line is knight to d2?
d2, yes, and then d takes e4, knight takes e4.
And now, of later years, you've preferred the most solid continuation for black, the Smyslov variation, knight to d7.
Knight to d7, yes, this is more solid. Of course, there is one trap. Once in Chess Olympiad, Keres won with queen e2, and automatically his opponent played knight g to f6 and knight d6 mate. So this was one game.
This is very exciting. Okay.
Yes, this is funny.
But of course, queen e2 is not the main try for white.
Yes, of course not.
But it makes for a nice humor. Okay. But the most serious tries for white here now are knight to f3, knight to g5, and bishop to c4. And each one of these, we will go ahead and take a look at a sample game from your previous play. The game with Kamsky continued with knight to g5.
Knight g5, yes. This is quite new. I mean, in chess theory of this variation, it has maybe 15 years, not more, even less.